Hello and welcome to another episode of Cooking Technique Tuesday. So I was at the farmer's market and here in Colorado, and the farm stand that I get a lot of produce from was giving away free kale. So I thought I'd look it up. I wanted to do something a little different than a salad. So there was actually a kale pumpkin frittata that also has sun-dried tomatoes in it. And funnily enough, I have literally everything for it, including leeks. Which give it an oniony kind of flavor. It's a good base, basically. One note on leeks: they're very dirty. So what I did was I actually sliced them up and then I put them in a bowl of water. They will rise to the top, dirt will fall to the bottom. Make sure that you clean these very well. Also in the recipe, it calls to reconstitute the sun-dried tomatoes, which I've already done. And then kale, this is not what it calls for in the recipe. So in the recipe, it calls for Tuscan kale. So I am just going to use this. And let's go ahead and make the base for the frittata. So it's really super easy. We got my eggs. So I'm gonna break up the yolks a little bit. And then all we're gonna do is add a pinch of salt, some milk, Parmesan cheese, which makes everything better. And then we've also got our pumpkin puree. There we go. All right, so what I'm gonna do is just mix this together, and then we need to go cook the kale. So one thing in the recipe, it calls for the kale to have a little bit of water added to it. Since this came from a farmer's market, I quadruple washed the kale, and there's still a little bit of water left on it because I just did that right before I filmed this. So I don't really have to add any water because there's plenty in there. So I am going to mix this until it's nice and smooth. And I will see you over by the kale. Alrighty, so I have my pan heated up. I'm gonna add my oil. And as always, when you can see a shimmer, that is when you know it is warm enough. So keep it on there for just a moment. So a couple things. I'm gonna add red pepper flakes, and I've got my leeks here. I'm gonna let those cook for a few minutes, and then I'm gonna add the kale in, and then the sun-dried tomatoes. Also, just a quick note while I'm letting this heat up just a little bit more. In the recipe, it says to use like a cast iron skillet. I love using my jadeite, so I'm using a pie plate. As you can see, I already coated it with olive oil spray. It pooled a little bit, so I'm gonna take a paper towel to it before I put anything in there. But I'm gonna go ahead, add the red pepper flakes and the leeks. So I don't want these to get too brown. But I'm just going to make sure, toss the oil around a little bit, make sure everything's all good and coated. And I'm going to cook this for a couple minutes, 2-3 minutes or so. So I'll see you when I add the kale. Alrighty, so my leeks have been cooking for a few minutes. Now what I'm going to do is add in the kale. And this will take a little while to cook. But we really just want to wilt it on down. Go. I've got a little bit of water at the bottom. So I'm going to add a little bit of salt to this as well. And then I'm just going to stir it, let it cook down. I want the water to cook out as much as possible too, because we don't really want to add that into the quiche. But it'll help the kale to wilt and steam it just a little bit. So I'm going to toss this all around, add a little bit of salt, and I'll see you when the kale is done. Hopefully about 5 minutes or so. Alrighty, as you can see, that cooked down quite a bit. So there we go. So I went ahead and turned the heat off. I go ahead and add in my sun-dried tomatoes. I also kept a few of them, especially the prettier ones. I'm going to just kind of put them in a little pattern on top when I place it in my pie pan. And again, you know, you can absolutely use a skillet. I just love using my jadeite. So there we go. So I'm going to go ahead and stir this together a little bit. And I added a little bit more sun-dried tomatoes than it calls for because I love sun-dried tomatoes. So I'm going to let this cool. I'm going to take it completely off the heat. I'm going to let it cool for about 5 minutes because what I'm going to do next is add it into my egg mixture and then pour the egg mixture into my pot pan. So I will see you in about 5 minutes. Alrighty, so I'm going to go ahead and add my kale mixture in. So while actually this was cooling, I did the dishes because Multitasking is key. So I'm just going to stir this in together, and then off camera I'm going to go ahead and place it into my pie pan, but that is definitely a two-hand job. So like I said, I just wanted to let it cool just a little bit since it's going into the egg mixture. As you can see though, the color is gorgeous. I'm very excited about this. So I'm going to put it in the oven, bake it, and I will see you when it is all done and cooled. Alrighty, we are back. So I let my frittata cool for a little while, and it looks absolutely delicious. Took a couple minutes longer, just because I wanted to make sure it's set in the center. But just make sure to check it, and as long as it's not jiggling like crazy in the center, you should be good. But let me take a bite and let's taste it. I love kale and sun-dried tomatoes and the pumpkin. So this will be my breakfast for the next several days. Feel free to check it out. Remember, the recipe is attached along with this video in this post. And let me know if you end up making it. But absolutely delightful. 10 out of 10 would make it again. So I will see you next Cooking Technique Tuesday. Have a good one.